is a bill that has been approved apparently by the U.S. House Committee. Well, it hasn't quite been approved yet, but it's under examination. It's a bill that will say that employers who have a wellness program as part of their workplace uh, uh, requirements, for their employees, they may now put penalties on employees who decline to participate in genetic testing. So what is that about? Well, um, these wellness programs have become very popular in a lot of companies. You might have one in your company too if you work for a company. Um, Sometimes they offer discounts or other on health insurance or other incentives. If you participate and get involved in a wellness program that seeks to sort of improve your health, lower your cholesterol, help you to quit smoking if you smoke, those kinds of things. And there's a wellness screening, that is involved in all of that to see what health risks, to assess the health risks of, employees on an individual basis. So now part of this can be genetic testing to find out what your DNA is and what potential risks you may have uh, according to your DNA. And because genetic testing and DNA analysis has progressed so much, they can literally get your DNA and discriminate against you based on what is in your DNA. So that's basically what the concern is. Uh, so this bill would allow employers who don't have the ability to make people undergo genetic testing under the existing federal laws, and there's also federal laws protect genetic privacy and protect and uh, try to protect non-discrimination. Uh, but the House Committee on Education and the Workforce has passed this bill, which is now being considered by the U.S. House in Congress, that would allow employers to get around that and collect the information, the genetic information, if it's part of a workplace wellness program. So basically, they can get an awful lot of information about you genetically uh, if you're part of this wellness program. Now, you can imagine that, there's some resistance to this quite a bit. Thankfully, I'd be worried if there weren't. Um, but a lot of groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics, AARP, the March of Dimes, and, Democrats in the House as well, are concerned that this is going to undermine basic privacy provisions, including the Americans with Disability Act and an act that was passed in 2008, which I certainly didn't know about until not too long ago, and you might not know either. It's called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, and GINA was passed just to ensure that discrimination would be prohibited by health insurers and employers uh, based on information that people have in their genes, so that employers can't discriminate against you, and health insurers can't discriminate against you just because of what they find out is in your DNA. Now, employees can voluntarily provide that information in a wellness program. But this, involvement in this wellness program is voluntary and must remain voluntary. And there must be no incentives for providing data or penalties for not providing it. But this bill would allow employers to impose penalties to encourage employees to give up their DNA info, basically. And those penalties, they're saying, okay, those penalties would include an increased amount of, of having to pay for the employee's health insurance, up to 30% of the total cost of it. So it's sort of this conflict between protecting genetic privacy. And as I say, this is where it gets dicey because, as I say, this is something that will increasingly be important in legal situations across the board. The idea of genetic privacy, protecting your genetic information, didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. So it's fascinating, and yeah, for some it's probably a little unnerving to feel like you have to protect not only your digital information, stuff you send emails about and stuff you have on your computer, but you have to protect the very stuff that forms your life. That's kind of metaphysics interjecting itself into, you know, uh, uh, civil rights and protection of against discrimination. It's a fascinating thing, and we can only expect more of that sort of thing to be emerging. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I'll post this article. It's from the Washington Post. I will post it on the on my Facebook page, which is Metaphysical Media. So just go to Facebook and type in Metaphysical Media, and my page will come up, and you'll find it. So on we go with our discussion about New Thought. And just to refresh your memory, or in case you missed what we were talking about, we're talking about the idea of New Thought, which is a movement that has given birth to a number of different disciplines and churches and religions, among them being the Church of Religious Science and the Science of Mind Church. And last week we talked about how those are radically different from Scientology, which sounds the same, but isn't part of this umbrella term at all. So let me just review the basic tenets of it. So the basic beliefs of New Thought, and these are, these are not dogmatic beliefs, and they're expressed differently in these different movements in these different churches. But basically the idea is that infinite intelligence, or God, is omnipotent and omnipresent. Spirit is the ultimate reality. So the truth of our existence is really spirit and not the physical world. True human selfhood is divine, so we're part of the divine aspect. That is hidden within our selfhood. Divinely attuned thought is a positive force for good. All disease is mental in origin. Well, if we're talking about the power of the mind to create, which we will be getting more into, then on some level you're creating your disease. And right thinking has a healing effect. So those are some of the chief tenets of the New Thought movement as it began in the late 19th century. And here is a take on it by a man named William James, who was a contemporary of the times, and he wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, and sought to sort of describe what this new thought movement was about. And so I'm reading now from his book. He says, for the sake of having a brief designation, I will give the title of the Mind Cure movement. There are various sects of this new thought, to use another of the names by which it calls itself. But their agreements are so profound that their differences may be neglected for my present purpose, and I will treat the movement without apology as if it were a simple thing. It is an optimistic scheme of life, with both a speculative and a practical side. In its gradual development during the last quarter of a century, it has taken up into itself a number of contributory elements, and it must now be reckoned with as a genuine religious power. It has reached the stage, for example, when the demand for its literature is great enough for insincere stuff mechanically produced for the market to be a certain extent supplied by publishers. A phenomenon never observed, I imagine, until a religion has got well past its earliest insecure beginnings. One of the doctrinal sources of mind cure is the four Gospels. So if you read the New Testament and you read the Gospels, you see how Jesus cures people, often by simply telling them, "Your faith has made you whole," believing in in their own health and the spiritual power that Jesus represents makes them well again. So another back to Mr. James's take on it. Another is Emersonianism or New England transcendentalism. So the transcendentalists, if you don't know, really began with Ralph Waldo Emerson and his treatise on Walden Pond. Transcendentalism basically promotes the idea that we do have an existence beyond the physical world. And then George Berkeley's idealism, which we talked about earlier when we were speaking about metaphysics. And another is Spiritism, with its messages of law and progress and development. Another, the optimistic popular science evolutionism, of which I have recently spoke. And finally, Hinduism has contributed astray. But the most characteristic feature of the Mind Cure movement is an inspiration much more direct. The leaders in this faith have had an intuitive belief in the all-saving power of healthy-minded attitudes as such, in the conquering efficacy of courage, hope, and trust, and a correlative contempt for doubt, fear, worry, and all nervously precautionary states of mind. Their belief has in a general way been corroborated by the practical experience of their disciplines, and this experience forms today a mass imposing in amount. So that was his description of this growing New Thought movement. And the New Thought movement grew and continues to kind of gather steam through the printed word. In 1906, William Walker Atkinson wrote and published Thought Vibration, or the Law of Attraction in the Thought World. Atkinson was the editor of New Thought magazine and the author of more than 100 books on an assortment of religious, spiritual, and occult topics. And in the following year, Elizabeth Town, the editor of the Nautilus, published Bruce McClelland's book Prosperity Through Thought Force, in which he summarized the law of attraction as a new thought principle, stating you are what you think, not what you think you are. So this is in 1903 when the idea of law of attraction and prosperity thinking began to emerge. And of course this has continued along and been popularized recently through such things as the popular DVD and the book, The Secret, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, and it was a huge phenomena